Hello out there once again in internet land. I am the Jazz and Blues audiophile, and in this little episode, what I want to talk about is 10 of my favorite jazz recordings that can start you off on your jazz journey. If you're just starting to discover jazz, you're starting to find out and figure out what jazz is all about, well, here's my 10 of my suggestions. Now, everybody makes their top 10, top 20, top 50, top 100 list. Here's my 10 top suggestions for now, because, hey, next week it would change. My list would change. The week after that, change again. There's so many great jazz recordings out there to listen to that it would take 2 or 3 lifetimes to be able to listen to all the jazz I'd like to listen to. There's so much out there still to discover, even when you consider just the jazz that was recorded during the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. You've got enough there to keep you busy, at least for 3 lifetimes. So, anyhow, without any further ado, here I go with my suggestion list. And these, I believe, are some albums that are easy access jazz. You know, it's not too complicated, not too difficult. Even though you're not necessarily used to listening to jazz, these things are highly enjoyable by themselves, whether you're used to jazz or not, or you're just getting started. So my first album is this one right here. Coleman Hawkins, the great Coleman Hawkins, Today and Now, recorded and released in 1962 on the Impulse Jazz label. Why is this a great album? Well, just listen to the first track. It swings like crazy. It really just rocks around the clock, if you want. It's just a great jazz recording. Everything on this album is great, but just that first track, which is called Go Little Liza, is worth the price of the whole album. And this is from this man right here, also known as the father of the saxophone. Why do we call Coleman Hawkins the father of the saxophone, the tenor saxophone? Because, well, you must remember the tenor saxophone was just recently invented in 1900. So it was had not been in existence for a very long time by the time Coleman Hawkins picked it up in the early 20s. And he became a virtuoso, one of the first great virtuosos of the tenor saxophone. And therefore, he contributed to putting this instrument, on the map, so to speak. So he's widely regarded as the father of the tenor saxophone, the great Coleman Hawkins. And here's the album. It's been reissued. I don't know if it's still available in this particular reissue, but this is the 20-bit super mapping digital remaster issue, and it sounds absolutely lovely, absolutely wonderful. It's definitely a great album, and as I say, the first track is worth the whole album, the price of the whole album. Go Little Liza. You gotta listen to this, just great. The second album that I would recommend is from one of my personal favorites, the late great Jimmy Smith. And this is recorded in 1995 for the Verve label. Now, Jimmy, of course, started off his career with the famous Blue Note record label. He recorded an awful lot of albums for them and became quite famous for these first recordings. Then he switched over at the beginning of the 60s, switched over to Verve, and then after Verve he went for various labels, recorded for various labels throughout the late 60s and the 70s and the 80s. And in the 90s he came back to Verve and he recorded this album in 95, and man, this is great, hard driving, hard bop stuff on this album for the most part. He's got Roy Hargrove and Nicholas Payton on trumpets, amongst other musicians, backing him up on this. And he's just phenomenal on this recording. And one of the tunes he does, the first track again on this album, is a whopper, quite the piece. He does a cover of the late great James Brown's major early 1960s hit, Papa's Got a Brand New Bag. He does an instrumental version of Papa's Got a Brand New, well, actually it's instrumental, and he also sings. Jimmy actually sings a couple of lines, very short lines in this recording. But just that track again, as on the previous album, that first track, Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, that instrumental version that he does, the cover he does on this has worked just the whole album. But the whole album is excellent. The rest of the album is hard driving, hard bop, and just fantastic. Excellent musicians, excellent album all around. Nothing is bad on this album. All the tracks are very, very good. So I highly recommend this one. Jimmy Smith, Damn. It's called Damn, released in 1995. And all these albums that I'm suggesting should be pretty easily accessible either at your local record store, on the internet, through Amazon or whatever, used or new, or even on download sites. You know, if you want to download and purchase on those sites, they should pretty much be readily accessible. Now this one, I'm not sure though about this one. This one is a little bit of an oddity. This one is the great Benny Goodman. I've always been a Benny Goodman fan. He's one of the reasons I got into jazz, got interested with jazz in the first place in the early days of my jazz listening. And this is an oddity because there's no info at all on this album. I don't know when it was recorded. I don't know who the recording personnel, who's playing with Benny. We have no idea. There's no information whatsoever. I picked this up quite a number of years ago in a delete bin. They were getting rid of this. I think it cost me just $6 at the time. And it is a wonderful small group recording of Benny Goodman. A wonderful, wonderful album. One of the musicians, I know who it is because I recognize the trumpet playing style. It's the great Ruby Braff on trumpet. And I believe, in my estimate, this was probably recorded in the mid-60s, early 60s or mid-60s, in my opinion, from the sound of things. And it's just Benny Goodman in a small group format. I think he's in quintet most of the time on these recordings. And it is absolutely wonderful Goodman. Goodman at his very best. He still had it in the 60s, man. He was not out of style. He was not, he was still playing just wonderfully good. One of the masters of jazz clarinet and masters of swing jazz clarinet, because even though the guy, if you looked at him, you say, oh, he looks like a serious gentleman, just very, very stuck up. But no, Benny, when he was on the clarinet, look out. He could really swing when he wanted to. And this album is a demonstration of this. And also, I must say, sound-wise, whoever did the recording on this is on London Records, and or CDs and records. This is a fabulous sound take. This is real hi-fi. This was really, really well recorded. It will sound absolutely terrific, whatever you play it on, but the higher quality system you have at home, if you want to listen to some really good jazz and some fabulous sounding good jazz, this was extremely well done, extremely well recorded, so highly recommended if you can get your hands on it. It's just called Benny Goodman and Friends. So, bit of an oddity, as I say, because there's no real information on the personnel and all that. So that was my third choice. The fourth choice, the great Modern Jazz Quartet. And this album, recorded in 1988 for the East and West label, is a beautiful, beautiful chamber jazz album. If you're not familiar with the Modern Jazz Quartet, they are a legendary jazz formation, a quartet composed of John Lewis on piano, the great Milt Jackson on vibraphone, Percy Heaton is on bass, and I believe it was Kenny Clark on the drums. And they are just, they play, they're the closest thing that jazz gets to classical. Pretty much. They really have this chamber sound, this very particular sound that belongs only to them. And it's a special approach to jazz. It's a very particular style, beautiful style. And this is one of the great tribute albums to Duke Ellington, the great Duke Ellington, that the Modern Jazz Quartet did in their latter years. Recorded in 1988, superbly recorded on the East-West record label, and highly recommended. This is my fourth recommendation for Ellington. It's called the Modern Jazz Quartet tribute to the great Duke Ellington. And speaking of Duke Ellington, here's my fifth choice, but I'm recommending this one not for Duke Ellington, although Duke is accompanying on piano, is on the piano on this record, 1963 recording on Verve Records. And this is the great Johnny Hodges and Duke Ellington. It's called Back to Back. But if you're not familiar with the great Johnny Hodges, he's one of the great alto saxophonists of jazz. He's got this wonderful, unique, mellow sound that you can easily recognize among 100 different alto saxophone players. Nobody sounds like the great Johnny Hodges. He's got this fantastic, beautiful, mellow sound about him. And the only one that could get close to that kind of mellowness on alto sax would be, I guess, in my estimate, Paul Desmond. And this formidable, beautiful, beautiful bluesy jazz album, excellent, highly recommended. So this is my 5th choice. Then in the 6th choice, we get to a name that, hey, I hear a lot of people presenting their top 10, top 20s, top 50, whatever, jazz albums, and most people concentrate on Blue Note artists, John Coltrane and Miles Davis and Thelonious Monk and whatnot. But I like to go a little bit wider, you know, and speak of the old guys, the guys before the modern jazz era, you know, the old swing guys, the swing era guys. And this is a name that you cannot pass up. If you're talking about jazz in general, I don't see how you can pass up this name, because he's a legend, an absolute giant of big band jazz. And I'm talking about, of course, this man right here, the great Count Basie and his big band. And this is a classic album. It's really the only classic album, I believe, that I'm recommending in this little list of 10. This is the legendary April in Paris album. Became very famous because of the actual track, April in Paris, the title track, and this rendition, this formidable 1956 rendition of April in Paris has that famous ending at the end where the good old Count Basie says, "One more time, let's try that thing once more once," and the band just swings that thing really hard, and it's a wonderful, wonderful album altogether. And the Count Basie Orchestra was just an admirable, formidable orchestra. Everybody admired this orchestra because they played as one musician. They played as one. It was a fantastically, very well-oiled swing machine. And this album demonstrates it beautifully. So April in Paris, released on Verve, recorded 1956 on the Verve label, Count Basie Big Band. Now, getting to my 7th choice. This is Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, recorded in 1959, and this is a semi-soundtrack to the French movie Les Liaisons Dangereuses, which is an excellent classic 1959 black and white French film, a absolute masterpiece in my opinion. But the music is also masterfully done. Some of the tracks on this album do play during the movie, but not all of them. Not all of them. This is Art Blakey and his Jazz Messengers, recorded in Europe for the Fontana French jazz label Fontana, and he's got Barty Williams on saxophone, the great Lee Morgan's on trumpet, and I forget who the other musicians are. But anyway, this was recorded basically for the film and inspired by the film. But it's a fantastic, very, very good album, and it's got some Afro-Cuban kind of jazz on it also. So a little bit different sound for Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers of the era. But very, very good album, highly recommended. So that's Les Liaisons Dangereuses on the Fontana label. Now, my next album is the only Blue Note album I've got to recommend here, but it's the great Ike Quebec, Blue and Sentimental on the Blue Note album. This is an album that caught my attention first because of the name of the man that's playing the saxophone, the tenor sax on this, Ike Quebec. Since I'm in Canada, I'm in the province of Quebec, I said to myself, isn't that funny? That man's got the name of my province. His last name is Quebec. So, yeah, I was intrigued by that. Anyway, but I purchased this album after listening to it first on vinyl quite a few years back. And if you want to hear an absolutely huge, fat tone, beautiful tenor saxophone sound, I mean an overpowering tenor sax sound, you just listen to that, his version on this album of the famous Count Basie classic, Blue and Sentimental. It's just beautiful, absolutely great tenor saxophone, very powerful tenor saxophone playing. And the whole album is just a wonderful Blue Note album. The great Ike Quebec on tenor sax. What a sound. And he didn't have a chance to record too much because he died at a very young age. I think by 1961 he was already dead and gone. He was at a very young age. We lost him too early. But he's a beautiful musician, legendary musician. And this is the album that proves it. If there's one album to prove it, to demonstrate that, this is it. Ike Quebec, Blue and Sentimental on the Blue Note album, Blue Note label. Sorry. Next up, number 9. Number 9, well, I've got this one here. The great Buddy Rich. But not Buddy Rich and his big band. This is Buddy Rich, recorded 1961. He had a hard bop group back in the early 60s. And these guys were really hard-driving, hard bop players. And this album, called Blues Caravan, recorded for Verve, proves that Buddy, even though he's from the swing era, he's a swing era drummer, he's basically a big band drummer, but he could play in small groups, and he was hip to what was going on in jazz at the time, and he assembled a hard bop group. And he's got the great Mike Manieri on vibraphone that really just steals the show as far as I'm concerned. He's absolutely wonderful on vibes. He's also got on flute, who is it? It's Sam Mose. Sam Mose is on flute on this, and just a beautiful job. And the version on this, one of my all-time favorites of the Duke Ellington classic Caravan, the version he plays on this with Sam Mose on flute, Mike Manieri on the vibes, and Buddy at the drums, it's absolutely magical. It's absolutely beautiful. It's just one of the best versions I've ever heard of Caravan. Anyway, it's on this album right here. Highly recommended. Blues Caravan, Buddy Rich in 1961. And the drumming, Buddy never sounded finer as far as I'm concerned. He's got some powerhouse drumming on this. If you like drums and you like your drums front and center, because Buddy was not really your background drummer. He was really front and center when he played. And if you like drums, you want to hear some fantastic drumming, this is a highly recommended album. Blues Caravan, Buddy Rich on the Verve label. And number 10. Lastly, this is another bit of an oddity, this record here. It's called Jump for Joy, the great Duke Ellington big band, recorded, I believe, in the early 60s. Again, this is one of those albums I picked up. It's on the Jazz Life label, and I believe that's a European jazz label or European CD label, whatever. But there's no information, again, on this CD. There's no personnel information. There's no recording dates. There's nothing. All I know is that Duke Ellington plays some of his classic numbers, some of his old stuff from the 20s and 30s, but in completely new arrangements. And he does a wonderful job of it. And this recording, I gotta say, this recording on this absolutely unknown, as far as I'm concerned, it's a pretty much unknown, virtually unknown label, the Jazz Life label. This is an audiophile recording. I mean, this has an absolutely beautiful, breathtaking, full sound. The big band, the Duke Ellington big band, was never so well recorded. I don't know where it was recorded. I don't know who did the sound take, who the engineer was, but whoever it was did a phenomenal, excellent job. And you can tell just by putting this in your CD player and listening to it on a good quality, high fidelity system, you will be able to tell this is a hi-fi recording. Extremely well done. So highly recommended, this album by Duke Ellington. If you get your hands on it, I don't know if it's easy to find, but it didn't cost much. It was, again, I got this years ago in a liquidation sale somewhere. And this is the good news about CDs. Now, the prices of CDs in general have gone down an awful lot from the early days when they first came out in the 80s, where you could get nothing under $20 or more sometimes. And now that everybody's going crazy and going back to vinyl with all its limitations, the good news is the price of CDs has gone down. You can get them for a bargain price. Most of the time you can get CDs for a very reasonable price. I mean, my local CD store here has a bargain on specially priced CDs. You can get 3 CDs for $15. So they come to $5 a piece and they're brand spanking new. And I'm not talking about shitty material either. I'm talking about top-notch recordings, really, really good albums. So yeah, the CD prices have gotten very, very interesting now that the CD sales have plummeted. Well, they're equalizing the prices, and they're offering CDs at a very, very reasonable prices now. So now's the time to jump on the bandwagon and start buying some CDs again. It's worth it. So anyway, these are my 10 suggestions. 10 suggestions for some of the best jazz out there. So until next time, stay tuned. I'll be back. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel and leave some comments below if you're not too shy. Until then, till next time, remember, jazz on. Talk to you later.